If Marxists have ever been in any doubt about what our attitude to religion ought to be, the religionists have been in little doubt about our attitude to communism. Let me quote from one of them. The Catholic Church says that communism and Christianity are totally incompatible, that communism is evil, and that in the last analysis the struggle of our time is between the forces represented by the Catholic Church on the one hand and communism on the other. Unquote. That was written by Douglas Hyde and it was printed by the Catholic Truth Society, and there's certainly no truth like Catholic truth. Now, if you prefer your anti-Marxism to come from higher authorities, perhaps one a little bit more in touch with the heavens above, you would be able to turn to the famous Rerum Novarum of Pope Leo XIII, in which it boldly states that, and I quote, "The communion of goods suggested by socialism must be entirely rejected because it harms those whom it wants to benefit. It offends the natural right of all. It alters the function of the state and disturbs the peace. The governments, through wise laws, must assure private property. One must keep the plebeian in harness, especially when so many uncontrolled desires are rampant. While justice permits the plebeian to try and better their conditions, neither justice nor common good allow them to damage other people's property or to invade what belongs to somebody else." Well, I'll leave it to the so-called Catholic socialists like Eric Heffer and Francois Mitterrand to answer for their views to the Holy Father, although on the basis of their current record they're not in much danger of excommunication. Of course, there have been a few confused clerics who have toyed with socialist ideas. For example, Judith Johnson, the late Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, who's called the Red Dean, was a member of the editorial board of the Daily Worker, and on the birth of the current Prince of Wales stated that Prince Charles will one day be the first king of a communist Britain. Well, we're not concerned with such muddle-headedness in this meeting this evening. People who have called themselves socialists have not always exhibited very great clarity when analysing religion. Two extreme attitudes have been popular. The first is an obsessive secularism, which is sought to oppose religion by means of detailed refutations of every single verse in the Bible. Most of what the secularists say is quite reasonable, and in fact, in their literature, which is a very long literature going back into the middle of the 19th century, there is a wealth of information about the absurdity of some of the claims of the Bible. But, in emphasis, this singular attack upon religion has served to divert secularist minds from a critique of the social system which necessitates religion. In a sense, secularism is an idealistic movement in that it supposes a primacy of ideology over social circumstances. The militant atheist slogan, "Chase the gods from the sky and the capitalists from the earth," is a very good one, but secularism has tended to concentrate its energies far too much upon the gods who aren't there rather than the capitalists who are. The opposite and equally dangerous response to religion by so-called socialists is to pursue a live and let live approach towards religion. Christianity's got a lot of nice socialist-sounding ideas in it, we're told, and therefore we ought to accept Christianity insofar as it is in some ways compatible with socialism. Again, this is a plainly idealistic approach. Ideas do not possess an independent character, but represent certain class outlooks. It's as daft to suspend hostility to Christianity because it occasionally preaches love and peace, as it would be to see some good points in fascism because it's in favour of cleanliness in the streets. Obviously, you take an idea and a body of thinking as part of the origin of that idea. The crucial starting point of a Marxist critique of religion is to understand its social context. Humans make religions in order to answer particular social problems. To criticise religious beliefs, we need to investigate their social origins. In the case of Christianity, which is the state religion of British capitalism, and therefore the one which I'm going to be dealing with in this lecture. The most significant Marxist analysis to date was written about by Karl Kautsky in his major theoretical work, The Foundations of Christianity, which was completed and published in 1908. Many people have only heard of Karl Kautsky because of Lenin's polemic against him in a work entitled The Socialist Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. It's not my purpose this evening to go into that polemic or to comment about it. However, to know no more about Kautsky than what Lenin said about him is to ignore an important aspect of Marxist thinking. Kautsky was born in 1854 in Germany, and as a young socialist he became the private secretary to Marx's collaborator, Friedrich Engels. For 35 years he edited the Journal of the German Marxists, the New Zeit, and of course he was a prominent figure in formulating the policy of the German Marxist Party, which Engels had a great deal of time for, the German Social Democratic Party. During this period, Kautsky wrote some of the most outstanding works of Marxist historical analysis. He wrote one book on Thomas More's Utopia. He wrote another on the history of ethics. And also, he wrote a major work explaining the theoretical ideas in Marx's great work, Capital. Kautsky's interests in theological history enabled him to provide a wealth of detail for his Foundations of Christianity. And if you want to understand the nature of Christianity as a historical movement, then I can't emphasize strongly enough the importance of reading that book. What I have to say now about the historical roots of Christianity is closely based upon Kautsky's work. To begin with, if we want to understand the Christians, we must understand the religion from which they split, which was Judaism. And if we want to understand Judaism, we must know something about the area of the Middle East called Palestine, where it emerged. Palestine was a border territory. It was at a point where the ancient Egyptian and Persian empires collided. It was traversed by the most important commercial routes of the Middle East, and so it dominated the traffic going through those routes. Firstly, between Egypt and Syria, and secondly, between the Phoenicians and Arabia. Until the 12th century, before the Christian era, and in future I'll refer to that as BC, Palestine was inhabited by a cattle-breeding people called the Canaanites. For many years, the people of Palestine were dominated by the Egyptian Empire. But in the 12th century BC, due to a conflict between the Egyptian and the Syrians, the territory was not under either of the two imperial controls. It was at this time that a group of Bedouin tribes under the general name of the Israelites invaded and conquered Palestine. These Bedouins were not particularly interested in cattle breeding, which had been the previous economic basis of Palestine, or of production of any kind. It was a non-producing tribe, but they were primarily involved in trade in commodities. In his commercial history of the Jews in antiquity, Hirschfeld states that the caravan routes passing through Palestine, I quote, were perhaps of greater commercial importance in its antiquity than our railroads are to us. Trade was a relatively new social phenomenon in the ancient world. The Israelite tribes were innovators in bringing about new trading practices, because contrary to the myth that buying and selling is inseparable from the human condition, like breathing and eating, trade is a social factor, and it only arises with the advent of private property. The first people to engage in trade were nomadic shepherds who exchanged the cattle, which they produced in abundance, for grain, oil, dates, or tools made of wood, bronze and iron. And because of their nomadic mobility, because they tended to move around through the deserts and the infertile and humanly untouched wilderness of the Middle East, these Bedouins were able to transport commodities from areas where they were abundant to those where they were scarce. That was their trading ability, their mobility.